I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission meeting of September 11th, 2023. For viewers watching at home, some members of the public may be participating via the video conference or teleconference. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence in remembrance of September 11th, 2001. Ready? Begin.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Thank you. Please be seated. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Commissioner Ferris?
Here.
Commissioner Tyler Kettlehut? Here. Commissioner Lanson?
Here.
Commissioner Link?
Here.
Chair McMahon?
Here. Tonight we have with us Deputy Community Development Director Fabiola Zelaya. Are there any written comments, announcements, or continuances at this time?
We have received supplemental packets that has been distributed to the commission and posted containing written correspondence related to items 7A and 8A, and was received after the agenda packet was published.
Thank you. It appears we do have a public comment, and so I have to read this for the benefit of everybody in the audience. Now is the time for public comment. At this time, any person may address the commission regarding a city planning matter that is not on this evening's agenda. Should the commission wish to discuss an issue raised by a member of the public, the issue will be referred to staff for scheduling on a future agenda. Anyone who would like to speak under public comments must fill out a speaker card in chambers or click request to speak on the agenda to receive instructions before the public comments portion of the agenda is called. The speaker's remarks should be addressed to the commission as a whole and not to an individual commissioner or staff member. Unless otherwise provided by the commission, speakers are limited to 5 minutes. The screen will show you the remaining time that you have. I'd like to call up William Maple, please. And when you come to the lectern, please state your name and city of residence for the record.
William Maple, resident of Newberry Park. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. This is my first time speaking before you. In Thousand Oaks, requesting a landmark marker is not a straightforward process. Typically, you would address members of the Cultural Heritage Board, but our city council is also our Cultural Heritage Board, and they don't normally meet publicly to make proactive decisions or evaluate landmarks. So sometimes a resident has to make a request or does make a request to this commission or this board, and that is sometimes handed to staff, and then sometimes that makes its way to the city council or cultural heritage, and then to the Cultural Heritage Board. So my point is, it's not a straightforward process, and this is my first step to secure what I think is a well-deserved landmark plaque. 2004 will be a banner year for the city of Thousand Oaks. It will be its 60th anniversary. That's a significant milestone, but even more impressive, our Timber School landmark will be 100. It was designed by the first licensed architect in Ventura County, and it may be the earliest example of Roy C. Wilson's public school designs. It is the oldest public use building still standing. Everything else are replicas or lost, like the Dos Vientos barns. That wasn't a public building. Both the 1924 school and the 1948 auditorium are Ventura County landmarks, not just the city. We are a young city, so very few of what our roots that we acknowledge remain. They need to be preserved and celebrated. Former Conejo Valley High School has been abandoned for far too many years. The public occasionally hears rumors that plans to develop the site are in progress, but unfortunately, it doesn't appear so. There's nothing that updates what's going on there. There's no acknowledgement of we're doing something. And they occasionally hear about that. You have changed the zoning, this body, twice at least. It may have been more. I did attend those meetings. But year after year, the land sits abandoned, and it's pretty vulnerable. Ventura and many of the neighboring cities around here proudly place bronze plaques stating landmark status and the value of historic assets. It seems a small task for our city council to state its commitment to preserve our history, honor our roots, and publicly celebrate the centennial anniversary of Timber School. Adding a 100th anniversary landmark plaque would be an appropriate step by those responsible for protecting the heritage of the community they serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 6 is the consent calendar. With the minutes of July 10th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting, are there any comments? Do any of my fellow commissioners want to make a motion? Commissioner,
Move to approve the consent calendar.
any discussion? All right. Will you, Secretary, please prepare us for a vote?
Commissioner Ferris?
Yes.
Commissioner Tyler Kettlehut?
Yes.
Commissioner Lanson?
Aye.
Commissioner Link?
Aye.
Chair McMahon?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item number 7, 7A, will the clerk please open the public hearing?
Hearing having been advertised as required by law is hereby open to consider Agenda Item 7A, Municipal Code Amendment MCA 2023-7004, Update to Inclusionary Housing Program and Non-Residential Development Linkage Fees, to recommend that the City Council adopt an ordinance amending the Thousand Oaks Municipal Code, Chapter 10, Affordable Housing of Title IX by updating Article 1, General Provisions, Article 2, Affordable Housing Trust Fund, Article 3, Inclusionary Housing Program for projects with 10 residential units or more, Article 4, Non-Residential Development Linkage Fees, and Article 6, Compliance Procedures to establish requirements toward the production of affordable housing as part of new development. The amendment establishes provisions for the construction of affordable housing as part of a new rental and ownership development and alternative options for the provision for affordable housing by paying in lieu fees or off-site construction, and to find the project qualifies for categorical exemption from the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, pursuant to Section 15061B3 of the CEQA guidelines. Located citywide, the applicant is City of Thousand Oaks.
Thank you. Presenting on behalf of staff is Senior Planner Ian Holt. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. So as was just stated by Lori, the item before you is an update to the inclusionary housing program and also by default the non-residential development linkages fee. This is a municipal code amendment. And as stated, the request before you is first to find that the action before you tonight is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, as well as amend the various articles of the affordable housing section of the municipal code. Though the title of the project is to amend the inclusionary housing program and the linkage fees, there are other components under Chapter 10 that are affected because at its inception, Chapter 10 was actually adopted in its entirety, and the one part that's not being amended here is the density bonus program, which would come later. So the primary purpose of the inclusionary housing program is basically, and the amendments that are contained to be presented to you tonight, is basically to provide the construction for affordable housing as part of new rental and ownership development, and also allow some alternative options as well, whether that be fee or off-site construction of the units. And basically, the staff is basically following the goals under the adopted housing element program. There's an objective in there to basically update the housing program and the linkage fees. It's primarily focused on the in lieu fees and the linkage fees. However, since the inclusionary housing program was created back in 2008, it was only applicable to for sale projects. And so given the times, it's been evaluated now to include both product types. But one of the other main goals of this is really meeting our regional housing needs allocation. This is the amount of housing. It's a combination of various income categories that we have to plan for the next 8 years, or up until 2029 now, so less than that. Essentially, we have to plan and we have to demonstrate that, and that's part of what the housing element does, as well as the general plan. But here we are to basically bringing forward an implementation measure of the general plan. So in adopting and coming up with the program that's in front of you, and as well as the linkage fee goals, is basically to avoid a burden to developers by providing feasible options, financially feasible and legally defensible, that also contribute towards the production of housing. And there's a balance between how much you can provide housing and still maintaining, economic development or viable economic development within the community. So, and as a bit of background, as I said before, the whole affordable housing program was created back in 2008. That included the inclusionary housing program and the non-residential development linkages fees. At that time, in 2008, there were fees actually set, but given the circumstances of the Great Recession, 2009 came around, and the council basically adopted a zero fee, essentially rendering that portion of the affordable housing programs ineffective, because the fee was a full option. So you could have the option to pay the fee, which was zero, or do 10% moderate or for sale projects. But basically, leading up to that, I have Kathy Head here from Kaiser Marston Associates. She is our consultant. There was several meetings that were conducted with the City Council, which came to our February 28th meeting, of which the findings of the financial feasibility evaluation, as well as the Nexus fee studies results, were presented to Council. And at that time, they gave direction based on those results, and that is essentially what's going to be presented to you as far as our recommendation. And basically, I have Kathy here to kind of walk you through essentially a lot of the framework for the inclusionary, and we will talk about linkage fees a little bit, but just to cut to the chase, the council did give a direction of applying a zero fee for linkage fees. So the discussion before you tonight is predominantly, or the amendments before you are focused on the inclusionary housing program. So with that, I will turn it over to Kathy, and we will start by going over the inclusionary health program context.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. As it was mentioned, I'm Kathy Head. I'm president of Kaiser Marston, and I've been working with the city for a little over a year on this project. One thing Ian didn't mention was at the beginning of the process, we also met with a variety of community groups, developer groups, and commercial developers in the community, which helped to guide us in the study. So I'm just going to start off with a little bit of background on inclusionary. Especially in this housing element year, or the last two housing element years, I've been very, very busy. Nearly every city seems to have said in their housing element, we're going to try to do inclusionary housing. And I said, yippee, okay, let's go. So the 170 jurisdictions in California is undoubtedly a low number. It's a number that's been quoted any number of times, but there's no survey that I've seen yet that gets them all. I have a survey that's got 99. I've seen surveys at 145. Anyway, there's somewhere between 170 and 200. It's growing all the time. And as I mentioned, largely in the last couple of years because of housing element and because of the very large RHNA goals. So that leads us to why RHNA goals are a major reason for trying to measure your affordable housing and trying to encourage a small part of the development in your community to be affordable housing. And I think that's a really important point, is that an inclusionary housing program cannot be expected to fill your entire RHNA goal. And in fact, it can only be anticipated to fill a small part of that goal because of the fact that you're asking the private development community to do it. And as Ian mentioned, you need to balance need to balance the obvious need for affordable housing and the requirement to create affordable housing against a developer's needs, because if a developer can't feasibly develop, then they simply won't. And so it's the old 15% of zero is zero. So you need to create, and that's a BIA, I attribute that to the Building Industry Association, by the way. But the math works no matter who says it. Next slide, please. So the next slide just gives you a picture of 93 jurisdictions that are in my survey, which since I've done this survey has grown by 6 more. But they still, the findings still hold. Commonly, the first test is how many projects and what type of projects will be subject to the requirement. So in other words, what size project will trigger the obligation? And the reason that's important is because creating an affordable housing requirement on small projects has a disproportionate impact on their economics than in larger projects that can absorb the affordable units within the larger project. Whereas if you have one affordable unit in a 5-unit project, it has a much different aspect than 5 units in a 50-unit project. So that's something to keep in mind. So common thresholds are between, in the survey, were between 3 and 10 units. There's actually some cities at 1, and there's actually a city that I'm aware of that's at 50 as their threshold. But the average and the median is somewhere between 5 and 7 as the just most common measurement of where the threshold starts. But again, they're all over the board. They range all over the board. Another thing that varies widely is the income and affordability restrictions that are required. The majority of the programs in the survey and in the programs I've looked at range between 10 and 20% a requirement of affordable. I've seen as much as 30, and I've seen as little as 5. And so, but really 10 to 20% is the most common range that you'll see in the affordable or in the inclusionary housing requirements. One thing to keep in mind is the more strict that the affordability requirement is, the lower the percentage needs to be. Because as they can make less, as a developer can make less money from a project, then they can afford to provide fewer units than if the restriction is placed at a higher level. So that, again, what you'll hear me say any number of times will be balance. Everything is a matter of trying to balance the unmet need for housing and the ability to create a feasible requirement. As I mentioned already, I won't go over it again, smaller projects really do feel it more than larger projects. Covenant periods. Covenant periods for ownership units are commonly set at 45 years with a requirement that the homes be sold and resold during that period at an affordable price, or 45 years with then the first seller being able to sell at market rate in return for providing the city with repayment of the original affordability gap and a share of equity appreciation. Both have their merits and demerits. We won't spend a lot of time on that tonight. And apartments tend to be, this is a tax credit covenant period is 55 years. It's also an old redevelopment period is 55 years. What I've seen lately in my practice is a lot of cities want to do longer affordability periods than the 55 years. Many want to do perpetual. There's some issues with doing it perpetually. There's a way to do it where you do it for at least 55 years or as long as it's used as a residential site. Going to the Southern California jurisdictions within the 93 cities survey, again, this is where the 50-unit threshold came in, and then 15 out of the 32 were set at 5 or fewer. The rates of income and affordability range from 4% to 30%, as I mentioned. And then ownership projects, and this is important, we'll talk about this again later, is they tend to be focused on the moderate income category. And especially in a community like Thousand Oaks, where your home prices are so high that the affordability gap between even a moderate income sales price and the market rate price is a very large number. And when you start getting into it being low income or very low income, given the expenses of owning a home in Thousand Oaks, you can actually at the very low income level get to a unit that you'd have to give away in order for it to be affordable. And so there's a concept there of one of the reasons you do moderate is because if you start getting into $700,000 and $800,000 affordability gaps, then you're really sort of playing the lottery with some people who live in Thousand Oaks, and they, 3 people win the lottery and get the $1.5 million house. And so the idea is typically with ownership units for that reason, but also to help ensure that these people will be successful homeowners in an expensive community so that they will be able to continue to own their home and maintain their home and not be overly burdened by housing costs. Homeownership is expensive. Again, I already did the covenants. And so all the programs that I've worked on include an in lieu fee option so that a developer can pay a fee in lieu of producing the units. That in lieu fee option can be hard to use or easy to use depending on the city's objectives for that in lieu fee. And so the reason in lieu fees are always included is because state legislation and state law have said you have to provide options in addition to just on-site production. And in lieu fee is always in there somehow, some way. Next slide. So inclusionary has evolved significantly over the last 35 years, and it's been helpful in a number of ways. One is there have been a number of court cases, and there have been a number of legislative actions that have taken place over the past 35 plus years, and I've been working on them that whole time, which is a little scary. What the courts have told you is the requirements cannot be confiscatory, and they cannot deprive an owner of a fair and reasonable return on their investment. Conveniently, they don't tell you what that means. So you're left on your own as a jurisdiction to come up with what you think is reasonable for not being confiscatory and not depriving an owner of a fair and reasonable return. That's why you've done a financial evaluation. The financial evaluation is there to provide a litmus test for what the impact is of imposing these requirements, because clearly there is an impact. There is an impact on a developer by being required to reduce the price or rent of their unit. The courts have told you, and the legislature has told you, that that's okay. It's a public good. But given that it's a public good and an obvious goal for the state, certainly, given the RHNA, is you can't be confiscatory and you can't deprive an owner of a fair and reasonable return on their investment. So when you're looking at this, or when I'm looking at this in a financial evaluation, I look at the strength of the real estate market in every community I work in. I've done now close to 40 inclusionary housing analyses, and every time I think it's going to be easy because I've done so many. And yet, no, they're always different. Every community is different. You really have to look at the characteristics, the demographics, the real estate, the need for housing, the ability of property for that affordable housing. So it's really important to look at that as part of your analysis. And then at the end of the day, your goal is to balance that need for unmet need for affordable housing to what a developer can feasibly develop without deciding to go to the next door community and develop. Next slide. So as I mentioned, inclusionary housing programs tend to set the ownership unit requirement at the moderate income level. And then on the rental side, AB 1505, which was adopted in 2017, allowed cities and counties to use inclusionary housing on rental projects. Between 2009 and 2017, you could not do that. There was a court case in 2009 called the Palmer case that effectively just eliminated the ability to do rental inclusionary for reasons that we could talk about if you'd like. In 2017, the legislature did the Palmer fix, which is AB 1505, which allowed cities again to use rental inclusionary. HCD, the Housing and Community Development Department of the state of California, provided some guidelines in addition to what the statute says. And what they said was, because the legislation said this and then HCD clarified that they meant it, was that you really shouldn't set a more stringent requirement for rental than 15% at low income. They didn't say you couldn't. They just suggested that it would be a good idea not to. And so it's always been my interpretation, and they wrote a technical memo to say, yeah, we weren't kidding, is to say, if you're going to apply something more than 15% at 80% of area median income, you better have a very strong study to support it, because HCD has the ability to come to your community before you got your housing element approved, to not approve your housing element. But even after your housing element's been approved, they have the ability to come in and ask you and require you to prove it's not a constraint to housing. And I've had that happen in cities I've worked in, so it's not just a maybe that could happen. So it's very important, I think, not to tick HCD off. That's my technical opinion on that. However, if you're going to allow folks to develop off-site, or you're going to allow them to do something other than on-site construction, then you can do whatever requirement you want, because the fundamental requirement, the on-site production requirement, is what any developer could do and is the first option. And so you get more flexibility in the options other than the production option. Then another thing to keep in mind is that, especially on rental projects, if an inclusionary housing program is adopted or used, and the affordability requirements are imposed, it's very likely on sites that can efficiently use it, they will use the state density bonus in addition. And so that state density bonus is one way of mitigating the impact of the income and affordability restrictions that have been imposed by your inclusionary requirement. Because you have to count the affordable units produced for density bonus as affordable units counted for your inclusionary. So it's a double count. And there's a case on that, because there was some confusion on that along the way. But there is now a case that verifies that. Next slide. So now we get to the financial evaluation. So what we did when we did the financial evaluation here is first we created residential prototypes. So we looked at recently proposed projects, recently developed projects. We worked with the city to create prototype rental and ownership projects that look like projects being developed in Thousand Oaks. And we did that so that when we do the financial evaluation, we're looking at things that are likely to be built in your community. And we also looked at the housing element as part of creating the prototypes. The next thing we do is we create a pro forma analysis for a project that has no income and affordability restrictions on it. Because the whole idea of inclusionary isn't, was the residential project feasible in the first place? It's what is the impact of adding income and affordability requirements to a project. So it's an incremental analysis to say, okay, if a developer could build unfettered, what return are they projected to receive? Then how much can we add in terms of income and affordability covenants that will, yes, reduce that return, but reduce it within that band that is not confiscatory or deprives an owner of fair and reasonable return. And so that's basically what we do, is we incrementally add in affordability till we get to within that range. And as I mentioned, the courts and the legislature haven't told you what that means. So Kaiser Marston as a concept, or what we do, is we tend to take a very conservative attitude of what can be placed on a developer without creating those constraints, because we look at it on two levels. One, you don't want to drive the development community away, and two, you don't want HCD knocking on your door. But so we won't be taking that last dime when we look at this. And so that's just something to know, is we are very conservative in our approach. And so that's that. Okay, so state density bonus, again, as I mentioned, is there to mitigate. It's actually somewhat objectively there to mitigate the requirements to provide affordable housing, be it through the RHNA or through inclusionary housing policies. And so a couple things to think about. One is that it does create, if it can be efficiently used, it does create significant value to a project, and that really needs to be taken into consideration when evaluating projects. Two is, if a project chooses to use the state density bonus, then they cannot pay an in lieu fee. They must produce the units, and they must produce the units on site. We ran prototypes of density bonus projects for Thousand Oaks, one which uses the maximum density bonus that is allowed by the legislation, and then one that uses a lower than the maximum amount, because that's what actually happened in Thousand Oaks. So developers can't always efficiently use the whole density bonus allowed by the state, or they choose not to use it for public reasons. But and it's just not always efficient to use if you have to change the type of parking with a number of stories, if it gets too tall, it actually, the density doesn't create value. So we ran it both ways. We ran the maximum and we ran one with a lower percentage. Next slide, please. So the conclusions of our analyses were, for apartment development, we came to the conclusion that a low-income requirement that ranged between 8 and 11% could be supported, or a very low-income requirement between 5 and 8% could be supported. Looking at everything, looking at the whole analysis, and there's a copy out there that's available to the public. It's 180 pages long. Based on everything in that requirement, or in that analysis, we came to the conclusion that a 10% low-income requirement would be recommended. That recognizes that developers may choose to use the state density bonus, and if they choose to use the state density bonus, it's actually typically financially advantageous to fulfill the requirement with very low-income units rather than low-income units. And if a developer fulfills your low-income requirement with a very low-income unit, you have to count it. Anything more stringent than what's required by your inclusionary must be counted. Next slide. So now moving on to ownership. This is the example that I talked about at the beginning of my talk, which is looking at the affordability gap created by imposing income and affordability restrictions on ownership units. So as you can see in the table here, if you look at a townhouse unit at $784,000, and you look at the moderate income affordable sales price, it's in the $500,000 to $530,000 range, depending on number of bedrooms. Comparatively, if you look at it as a low-income unit, the prices range between $228,000 and $236,000. So as you can see, it's about half, going from moderate to going to low. Primary reason for that is at the moderate income level, a higher percentage of income can be allocated to affordable housing costs than can be at the low income level. Again, and just because of discretionary income, but also because of statutes. Looking at a detached single-family home, which I think is a really important thing to look at, you have a market rate price of $1.5 million. And as you can see, the affordable prices at the moderate income level and the low income level are actually slightly lower than they were for the townhouse project. And that's because of the property tax cost difference. So as you can see, they're still in the range of 500, plus or minus 500, or plus or minus $200,000. But there is a difference, and the more expensive the house gets, the lower the affordable housing cost gets. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Next slide. So the conclusions to our ownership housing financial evaluation were that a 5% requirement could be supported for townhouse or condominium type development. Or no, I did that backwards. A 5% requirement could be supported for a single family home type development, and a 10% requirement could be supported for a townhome or condominium type project at the moderate income level. And that falls to 3.5% to 5% for low income. We strongly recommend you establish a moderate income standard. A, just because the affordability gaps are so large, and B, because then the percentage of units is smaller that can be supported. And that's that slide. So, fulfillment alternatives. So in lieu fees are always a major topic of conversation. Developers are very interested in lieu fees. Developers, given their druthers, would pay the in lieu fee every time. So it's important to figure out as a community how you want to treat in lieu fees. Some communities really want to get in lieu fees because they want to be able to provide those funds to leveraged affordable apartment projects. They can go out and get low-income housing tax credits and things like that. Other communities are very interested in making sure the affordable units are dispersed throughout the community. Both are laudable and appropriate goals. So each community has a different idea about how that should be done. The other thing that comes up in lieu fees is, as I've mentioned now multiple times, small projects get really hit by inclusionary. And so often you'll see an in lieu fee paid by right or allowed, permitted without requirement to get approval from anyone for small projects. So 1 to 10 units, 1 to 20 units. In this case, we're going to jump to the fact that we're recommending a 10-unit threshold, so 10 to 20 units. So small projects almost universally get offered the opportunity to pay an in lieu fee. And then communities' views on density. Because, as I've mentioned, a developer who wants to use density bonus cannot be stopped. So you have very little discretion on approving density bonus projects. And so when you adopt an inclusionary ordinance, or in your case, re-up an inclusionary ordinance, is recognize that in all likelihood, you will see an increased number of density bonus applications. It's neither good nor bad, it just is. Depending on your community view, it's either good or bad. And if you take in lieu fees, then it becomes your responsibility to produce the affordable housing units. So that's the downside of getting an in lieu fee. In addition to not spreading the units, you've now got this pot of money and you need to figure out how to spend it to get affordable housing development. The three ways of establishing in lieu fees also vary based on what your goals are. The basic way to do it is to say, well, if they produce the units on site, what would that cost to the project be? And then just translating that to a fee. So it's 1-to-1. A developer should be neutral between paying the fee or building the unit. If you use it that way, developers will typically pay the fee because then it's a known, they know exactly what it's going to be, and they get all the upside potential for all their units. But that is the way that typically an in lieu fee is calculated, is to look at what the impact is of the requirement and then translate that to a fee. Conversely, if you're a community that wants to encourage payment of the in lieu fee, then you can establish a discounted in lieu fee. It's just say, so it becomes an encouragement to pay that fee. And then again, the third one, and again, this is commonly used, is a reduced in lieu fee for small projects. So you have a one base fee for projects over, say, 20 units, and then anything below that pays a lower fee. Next slide. Okay, so department development and lieu fee analysis. We're just going to skim over this. Ian and I decided that we should show you this just to show you how complicated it is. I think that's really the sole reason for this slide. Because ownership's easy. Ownership, you take the market price and the affordable price and you subtract. It's really just the simplest possible way. But when you have an apartment, it's an ongoing concern. So it has cash flow every year, and the gap then goes on for 55 years. And so you have to figure that out. And that's basically what this does, is it figures out the difference between the rent at market rent and then in this case at low income rent. It figures that out, and then it says, oh, wait, so they're going to get less income, so their property taxes are going to be less, because they'll go appeal their property tax to the assessor to say, no, my income was less, so I want to pay that less. So then you subtract that from the impact, and then that represents the annual affordability gap. So once you have the annual affordability gap, then you take it and basically you divide it by the threshold return on investment that came up in the market rate analysis. And then you translate that into a fee either per unit or per square foot. So simple, right? Okay, so then we looked at other fulfillment options for you to consider. Off-site production is often discussed. It's a very common option that is considered for inclusionary housing programs. Almost invariably in the communities I work in, people say, that's great, except we don't have any land. So how we've sort of adjusted for that is to say, if you have a big enough site and you're doing an ownership project, for example, you can split that site or you can divide that site and you can build market rate ownership units and then affordable apartment units on the same site to fulfill that obligation. That way, in many ways, inclusionary is much better suited to rental than it is to ownership because tenants move in, tenants move out. They don't expect that they're going to make money when they move. Whereas ownership units, if you create an ongoing resale control where each owner has to sell and resell at an affordable price, there's not a lot of money to be made. And in fact, no, if you bought in 2015 and you're trying to sell today, there's some money to be lost because interest rates have risen so much in that period. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about ownership units. And so to the extent that somebody could parcelize and build apartments, that can be an advantageous scenario for the city and for the developer. Again, with off-site production, there's a land shortage issue. Land dedication, it can be done. If you do it, we have 4 pages of things that would have to be done for the city council to approve a site, because you're going to get that site, and you're going to need to find a developer to develop affordable on it. So you need to make sure, if you do this option, that it's ready for development, it's zoned for development, it's cleaned up, it's appropriately sized for the number of units, et cetera. There really is 3 or 4 pages of restrictions. And then acquisition rehab, which is always a popular scenario, and we're not recommending it, because I wear a black hat on most occasions. It's because you can't get RENA credit for it. It's a good goal, it's a good way to provide affordable housing, and in a vacuum, if you didn't have RENA goals, I would have a different recommendation. But given the finite number of units you're going to get and the large RENA you have, I can't recommend doing acquisition rehab. Next slide. So now we get to policy recommendations. As I mentioned, because I spoiler alerted it, we recommended, and this was discussed at the city council, we recommended a range of thresholds and gave it to the city council to consider, and 10 units is what came up. It's a pretty common threshold. It divides nicely. It's well within the range of typical. As I mentioned earlier, this is sort of the new trend with apartment development, is to say that the covenant will run for at least 55 years, but for as long as the project is put to a residential use. So if sometime in the future it's just no longer a residential neighborhood, you don't want city councils and planning commissions hamstrung by saying, oh no, that has to be an affordable apartment forever. So it's a way to getting close to perpetuity without doing perpetuity. And then for a variety of reasons, the recommendation for ownership housing is to keep it in the inventory so you can continue to count it, and so you have that affordable housing unit for 145 cumulative period. So as I mentioned when I was going through the presentation, we're recommending a 10% low income requirement for apartments, 10% moderate income requirement for townhomes and condominiums, a 5% moderate income for detached single-family homes. Again, I just have to reiterate this. The courts haven't told you what confiscatory or providing a reasonable return is. We really think it's appropriate to use a conservative approach, and we measured this in 3 different ways in our analysis when we set up these restrictions. And the results are based on the pro forma analyses that we took on prototype projects that are typical to Thousand Oaks. Slide. So the in lieu fees, we did it on the affordability gap approach that I discussed as one way that you would do in lieu fees. And the result was that for apartment development, it would be $25.70 per square foot of building area in the entire project. So that's an important distinction because there are no affordable units in the project. So the way you calculate, there's 3 ways to calculate it, but the way we're recommending to calculate it is $25.70 against just take the whole project, its square footage, multiply it by $25.70, and that's the in lieu fee. If you look at the financial evaluation, we showed how that correlates to the cost per inclusionary unit or the cost per inclusionary unit. We just think per square foot is a more fair measure so that small units don't overpay and large units don't underpay. So rather than using per unit. For townhome development, the fee we're recommending is $14.60 per square foot of saleable area. And for detached single-family homes, it's $16.80 per square foot of saleable area. We think that, for example, if your project has a 5.3 unit inclusionary housing obligation, then the developer should be allowed to pay a fee for that 0.3 unit. So they'd provide 5 units and they'd pay a fee for the 0.3 unit. Also apartment projects with fewer than 20 units should be able to be paid the fee. So projects between 10 and 20 units should be allowed to pay a fee. And if a developer can prove extreme economic hardship, projects over 20 units should be considered. However, extreme economic hardship should all be the burden of the developer to prove, and it's only in very limited cases that it would ever be applicable Because once an ordinance is in place and once the rules are there, somebody shouldn't pay too much for the land in order to then say, oh, I can't afford to do affordable housing because I paid too much for the land. So extreme financial hardship, the only reason we put it in is because the lawyers tell us to. And so that's why. And I've written a long definition of it, but most of the definitions of extreme financial hardship just say doesn't violate the state or federal constitution. And then I think that particularly single-family homes, but even townhomes and condominiums should be allowed to pay the in lieu fee by right, just because the money can be deployed more efficiently for rental units. Off-site production, I don't recommend that off-site production be allowed for apartment units. I think they are more appropriately included within market rate apartment projects. I think it does satisfy the goal of spreading the affordable units throughout the community and their apartment developments. So to build a separate affordable housing apartment project doesn't make a lot of sense when you're building a market rate project and you're limited to a 10% requirement. Ownership requirements, as I discussed in more length, I think that off-site production or parcelization of a site should be allowed if then they fulfill the obligation with apartment development. And that's that, actually. Land dedication, this is where the 3-page explanation comes in of when and if the city council should approve land dedications. It's definitely should be left to the city council's discretion to accept or reject a land dedication proposal. And then acquisition rehab, I already said, I don't recommend it because of RENA. Okay, that was inclusionary. Now we're going to spend 2 minutes on the linkage fee. We did a whole linkage fee analysis, and we talked to the community, and we talked to the business community, and in Southern California, there are plus or minus 5 commercial linkage fee programs. They're much more prevalent in the Bay Area than they are in Southern California at this point. Over time, this may grow, and it's not that it's not an appropriate way to help get affordable housing, since employment tends to create the need for affordable housing, which is the whole premise. However, if the community is trying to compete against local other communities for these commercial enterprises, and it's just one more cost burden, that's a policy objective to be considered. And that's the policy objective the council considered. And so if you look at this chart here, we did this whole study, and the allowable fee is dramatically higher than this. But then the financially feasible fee is dramatically lower than the allowable. The nexus is how much affordable housing need is created by commercial development. And it's this much. But the financially feasible fee is this much. And so what ended up happening is we really did come to the conclusion that $5 was the maximum you could really feasibly and market-wise apply, and the council decided to go with 0. The end.
Thank you, Kathy. I would just like to add, as part of the recommendation, staff did recommend, because out of the 5 categories, only the industrial actually had a reasonable rate of return, but in turn, the council elected not to apply it just to one non-residential land use designation. They didn't foresee it being kind of a viable source in of itself. And just for perspective, when they originally set the fee, all the others had a fee except industrial. So with that, now I would just like to really go over the components of the ordinance amendment that's before you. And as stated in the title, the Chapter 10 encompasses a lot of aspects that are somewhat interrelated. But Article 1 really sets the definition. So part of the ordinance before you tonight has definitions that have been revised to reflect the current terms of the inclusionary housing program, and then also eliminated some older terms that are really not applicable. Article 2, there was just some slight rewording for the purpose and the use of the monies of the fund. The language is now amended to prioritize construction. The fund still has the ability to do that preservation and rehabilitation, but the intent behind the fund now is really for the production of housing. So in the event that production of housing is infeasible, then, yeah, money could be used for rehab, but that is obviously, as we were just stated, not the priority of the inclusionary housing program. So that's just some language amendments there. Then you get to the inclusionary housing program itself. Purpose, intent, basically with revised intent statements, and also removed any of the findings which were based on the old study from 2009. Also, obviously, the applicability that we talked about, the 10-unit threshold, the percentages, and how in lieu fees can be paid. And then there's also revised standards, or just to say updated standards for the inclusionary units themselves, the design, what they look like as far as the materials, the interiors, so that they're commensurate with the market rate units, the location, they're interspersed throughout the project, the exception for off-site production, timing of construction concurrent with the market rates, as well as access to the same common amenities that the rest of the units have. The alternative compliance procedures, basically it outlines just what Kathy went over as far as the recommendation before you in terms of the application of the in lieu fees, production of the rental inclusionary units as part of ownership development, that's that on-site parcelization, and then the very lengthy criteria required for the council's consideration for any kind of land dedication. In terms of, and then you have a section 5, which includes inclusionary housing incentives. That incentive in there is basically just consistent with density bonus law. For example, if you were to look at density bonus law, a project that provides a 10% low income amount of affordability would be allowed one incentive under density bonus law. You don't actually have to build a density bonus project, but if you are a qualifying project, you can meet those incentives. And that's actually, it's not a very common practice, but it is something that jurisdictions do. You may have a project come in and they will use the density bonus law if they provide that requisite amount of affordability. So that's the one incentive that we included as part of the inclusionary housing program, which for the most part is already allowed by state law. Now, Article 4, you may ask, why are we amending the linkage fee section since we're not even presented with a fee to be adopted? Well, basically, the language in that is still reference to the old studies. And, here we are resetting. As we go forward to the city council, there will be a resolution essentially resetting the fee at 0, but it's based on the findings of the Nexus study that we just discussed. And then Article 6 is really compliance procedures as far as, because before there was only the on-site production, so the various options that are allowed under the inclusionary program, there's compliance procedures amended for that, as well as some additional recordation requirements whenever there's an affordable housing agreement. So I just kind of wanted to go over those components. As far as the project as a whole, it meets the general plan goal, to develop additional tools enabling commercial, industrial, and in this case, residential development for an efficient and compatible manner. And then we also have the housing policy to provide a balanced range of adequate housing for the planning area residents, regardless of age and income, and a variety of other factors. As mentioned before, the housing element, Goal 1, provides a wide range of housing opportunities for persons of all income levels. Under Program 6, there was that, as mentioned before, the objective and time frame of updating the in lieu fee and the linkage fee by 2024. So we're on a path to meet that goal. With that, staff's recommendation is to find that the municipal code amendment is exempt from CEQA, and also to approve the amendments to Chapter 10 of Title 9 of the Thousand Oaks Municipal Code as described in the ordinance. I would like to just read into the record one minor amendment to the ordinance. It was just kind of brought to our attention as we were looking at it. Under Part 5 of section of the ordinance, which is page 5 of the ordinance, Section 9-10.303 reads, A and E of the Thousand Oaks Municipal Code is amended to read as follows. What we'll add to that is, and the deletion of Section F. So basically there was a replacement. E was replaced with the old F with new language. So that section has now become A through E, and the F is gone. So we just want to make sure so that when the code prepare it, they don't keep the old F. So we would basically be adding that to the title section for Part 5. And that would conclude our presentation, and Kathy and I are both available for questions.
Thank you. That was extremely thorough, and actually, you made it very understandable. So thank you again. Do we have any questions of staff? Mr. Lanson?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Holton, Ms. Head, for going through this process. Again, it's funny, I went to the Planning Commission meeting 6 years ago where we first started just talking about this, so this is an amazing feat to finally get it before us all on top of the general plan, because again, you guys apparently want to do as much work as possible in terms of dealing with things. I had some clarifying questions from my own thought process, and again, you guys have been living with this, but I just kind of want to understand some basic things, again, looking at how practical things may come out. Kind of going in reverse order, as to the extreme hardship issue, I know that there may be a test or however that process. Who decides that it's an extreme hardship or not?
It becomes the city council's decision. It becomes the developer's responsibility to prove to the city council that it's an extreme hardship.
So they have to make a specific application for an extreme hardship?
Correct,
And that does not come before the Planning Commission? It goes directly to the City Council?
typically.
Okay, just making sure we know that process. As to the in lieu fee, Mr. Holt's looking up, is that?
Well, I think typically that I would assume that would occur during the entitlement review process, or is that in advance? So I think typically, like if we had a project with an inclusionary housing component, or they were saying that they couldn't comply with it because of this, I think that would be a consideration that would go through the decision-making process. So if it was, a land use entitlement that was already slated to go to Planning Commission, I would think then it's a recommendation from the Planning Commission to City Council.
If I
I
may,
think
Chair.
Mr. Heher has a comment on this.
So this is a issue that we've been looking at because it is, as Ms. had stated earlier, a lot of jurisdictions literally have a very short definition of what this means, extreme hardship, because the whole point is, okay, what are the rules, right? And so when we looked at this and Ms. Head came up with the definition, I think it's going to be, depending on what the circumstance is, if it's going to be an application that goes to Planning Commission, it would probably be a recommendation, because at the end of the day, I think it's City Council has to make that policy decision that it meets the extreme hardship at the end of the day. So I think it would be one of those situations where you have a decision-making process, and sometimes you make the decision as the Planning Commission body, and sometimes it has to be a recommendation to council. And so that's, I think, as I see this happening, I think that's what's going to happen. It just depends if it's a specific application just for that, then it might be just going directly to City Council. But if it's going to be an application as part of a development project in which they are going to ask for that specific type of request, then it would probably go through Planning Commission with a recommendation to City Council.
Because my thinking is, again, with all the new rules that we have going on, are there certain types of developments that literally would not be brought to the Planning Commission?
Correct. And so that goes back to sometimes you don't have the right, as the body of the Planning Commission body doesn't have the right to make a decision on one aspect of a thing, so it becomes a recommendation. And we've seen those. So I think that's how the application is probably going to be processed.
Okay.
Again, it's a very interesting topic because we've already discussed it internally, just because it is just not clear, right? And that's what happens. But we have, for example, I'll just give you the example, and Ms. had mentioned a little bit in her report, is the City of San Jose case that came out a few years ago in 2015, and then a couple of years later, we had another case. And these cases are defining some of these circumstances, right? And so you're starting to get an idea. That's why we're very careful with the balancing to ensure that we can lay a strong defense in our numbers if we get attacked based upon all the history we have, the case law. And so that's why we are conservative with this range that we're going through. But again, it becomes boy, a case came out that really helps us or helps understand the situation. For example, the other comment that Ms. Head brought up was a case in which they clearly established that if you do a density bonus, those affordable units apply to the inclusionary housing, right? That is now a case that says that. So most jurisdictions, I believe, and Ms. Head can correct me if I'm wrong, I think most jurisdictions interpreted it that way. But I think we now have a case that clearly says that's what it is, right? So those are just examples of you might have as time goes on when we have these, especially in today's world with California and the housing crisis that we have, that those are going to be some of the things that are challenged, right? Again, we're trying to make sure that we balance the ability for a developer to come in here and do it and build it, right? But also get the benefits of either a density bonus or to, again, pay what we think is their fair share for affordable.
And again, it was just Ms. Head's discussion about it not violating the Constitution as being somehow in the definition, which made me think, okay, this is a very large, window to fill.
Right, and so we can say, a taking or something, some large kind of broad kind of concept like that. But again, I think we left it broad on purpose because I think there's going to be some development as cases come along in the next few years that are going to help us pinpoint, okay, here are some of the factors that we have to rely upon. And then if we are factors that we see we don't have, then we put those into our system.
Okay, that sounds good. Going back, and again, this is, I'm picking and choosing things here. The in lieu fee issue as to apartments, I think, and again, you said, and it's based upon the leasable area. That's what it says here. And I think you kind of made a reference to you just take the overall square footage of the building and you divide it.
Well, it's the overall leasable area. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I just didn't speak clearly.
Okay, I'm just trying to make
No,
sure,
understood.
because there's parts of buildings sometimes that aren't leasable.
No, right, and that's why I like to use leasable, because then you start getting into, well, do the corridors count? Does the elevator count? So if you just use leasable area, everybody knows what that is.
Clarity is fantastic. That's what I'm looking for. Speaking of which, and again, kind of going on what Mr. Here was talking about, to kind of make it, and again, if I'm giving a hypothetical, it's difficult, but the double counting thing of what we were just talking about, is it possible to give an example? Say, for instance, a 50-unit apartment building is going to be built, and they want to take advantage of both the density bonus and obviously comply with the inclusionary housing ordinance. How many units would that ultimately then mean that they were able to build?
Can we do 100 just because
Sure,
it's easier?
absolutely.
It's easier math. Okay, so if you have a project that by zoning can allow 100 units, right? Then by the inclusionary housing requirement that's been recommended, you would have 10 low-income units and 90 market rate units. Now, your developer comes and says, well, that's great, but I want to use density bonus. And so I want to use density bonus and get to 150 units, because you can get the maximum density bonus you can get is 50 units. To do that, they have to take 15% of the base zoning, so the 100 units, they have to do 15% very low income. All right, so that would be 15 very low income units, right? So they have a 10-unit low income requirement and a 15-unit very low income requirement. They would have to provide 15 very low income units, and they would have satisfied both, and you'd have 150 units.
Okay, so that's how, it's not like they're building an extra 25.
Right.
So that's why I wanted to make sure that was clear, because that seemed to be double counting in whose favor, I guess, is the question.
It's in the developer's favor.
That's what I wanted to make sure it was clear. Okay. The ordinance that, if it kind of goes through and gets passed, it's not retroactive, meaning that it doesn't apply to any application that's already been approved, I'm assuming.
That is correct. And how the in lieu fee is set, and it actually continues in the ordinance, is it's prior to approval. So even if during its review, like the application of the fee, the inclusionary housing ordinance, you would have to have an approved project. But if someone were to elect to do a fee, currently it would have to be, the project could not be approved, so.
So at what stage of the process, so say, I mean, again, using clarity, say it's January 1st, 2024, it gets approved. At what stage of the applications where it would apply or not apply?
The inclusionary housing program would apply to projects that are not complete by that time.
And how are you defining complete?
Complete is basically the statutory requirement within 30 days of a review. Well, that is the minimum amount of time that we have to review. Basically, an application that has met all our submittal requirements and basically has provided complete information for a full evaluation of the project.
Okay, so it's earlier than when it would come before a commission, obviously.
Yes.
So it's when it's satisfied the city's requirements, it sounds like, in terms of the submission of all the information. Okay, I just want to, again, trying to make sure that it's clear in terms of how that process would go. I think that's my 3 questions, so I will abdicate the rest of my time and let other people ask questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Kettelhut, did you have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I want to say thank you for a ridiculously thoughtful analysis. You know, that's something I think we do so well in the city is provide that balance, which you don't see in a lot of other cities. I mean, where you said it's a balancing act. We take the unfettered production numbers and we incrementally add in the inclusionary housing. And that really stood out to me, the fact that you are incentivizing, there's balance, that you're giving alternative compliance procedures. All of this adds up to just a really lovely package, and I thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you.
And you have condensed 632 pages so beautifully. Thank you so
It's a
much.
lot. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Ferris?
Thank you. If I could follow up on Commissioner Hansen's comment about the extreme hardship decision-making, I think that the one question I would have is, does there needs to be a change in the ordinance to enable that in cases like this, it's a recommendation versus approval or somewhere in the code, or is it handled in that way? Because in general, like there's like the ordinance applies, here's how the fees are applied. But in this case, if you have a hardship, you could do this, and who makes that decision? If it has to be the council, does there have to be something in the ordinance that kind of enables that in that case, it would be a recommendation, not a straight approval?
I think our ordinance might say decision-making body is, I think I understand what you're saying. I'll check. Again, this is a recommendation to City Council tonight, so we will definitely work on that to see if we need to clarify that in any more detail. I'm pretty sure, though, that we would consider the City Council being the decision-making body for that issue, but I'd have to look at it a little bit more closely.
In that case, though, if it's a decision-making body and then it gives the option to have an extreme hardship, we don't want the planning commission making that if the City Council reserves that right, right?
Correct, but sometimes, as I was trying to explain, maybe I just did a poor job, but is we have some cases that come before you, but because of, for example, a general plan amendment, it goes to City Council at the whole, so your decision is a recommendation, and that's how I was envisioning this would be a recommendation to City Council if that was one of the elements. Again, part of it's just to who can make the final decision on whatever subject it is.
Yeah, and I actually completely agree with that. I just want to make sure, does the ordinance enable that clearly?
Understood.
Yeah, thank you.
If I may, Commissioner Ferris, one suggestion in reading that section, basically it's under Part 9 of the ordinance, subsection A1IV, it talks about, where the application of the extreme hardship is to occur and refers to the decision-making body. We can, if that is the collective opinion for getting clarity and direction from the council, that is some language that we could possibly suggest to change, so that basically, if it is a recommendation from the planning commission, ultimately, the determination of extreme hardship would fall on the city council versus just a generic decision-making body, because I think what I've been hearing is that ultimately that would be a recommendation up to city council. So that could be an added bit of clarity into the ordinance.
Yeah, I think the comment was a good one. I think it's just something to add clarity on how that gets added, because it wasn't in there before, right? It was kind of a very straightforward application of a fee or requirement for affordable units.
Yeah, correct. There was no extreme hardship.
Okay. Thank you. That takes care of that. One question I did have, I just want to double check. In the presentation, there was a little bit of confusion as I was reading it about this particular area. In some cases, 20 or fewer units, has the units 20 or more, could do the extreme hardship. I believe the ordinance allows for 20 or fewer to be the in lieu, but above 20 is where they can Am I reading that right? There was some confusion in the presentation. I just want to look to see what the ordinance.
In the present, well, so the ordinance is, the fee is allowed by right for projects of 20 or fewer units. So it's greater than 20 units have to demonstrate the extreme hardship in order to get the inland fee.
Okay, clarity on that. That was helpful. Thank you. I did get the benefit of seeing your presentation on YouTube from February. So give credit to the staff of making all videos and records just publicly available, and chastise you all for making geeks like me having to view all these things so I can get it. But I was able to see the presentation, and there were some things in the other presentation weren't necessarily here, and I tried to get an understanding of the impact of ownership. I think I understand for apartments and rentals, you were describing kind of a way of allowing for perpetuity of that type of covenant. For ownership, if it's sold at a lower price, when it is first sold by that owner, I thought in the previous presentation you were talking about there was a payback of potential equity back to the city. Can you go into a little bit more detail there? Because it's almost not as if they buy it at 220 and they sell it at $1 million and they get the balance, right?
Okay, no, that's an excellent question. And so there were two ways to do this. And the way the ordinance came down, or the way the recommendation came down, was to say that for the first 45 years, from the day of the first sale to the end of year 45, no matter who owns it, they have to have purchased it at an affordable price for a moderate income household, so that the affordable housing cost would be calculated each time the unit was sold. So it'd be some function of the 200, or the 500,000, as increased by changes in the area median income, as impacted by interest rates and other costs of owning housing. So that if it's structured that way, which is the way it is currently recommended, then there is no real significant gain for each owner who sells and resells. They will have built up some principal on their first trust deed mortgage. Conceivably, the affordable price will have gone up a little, but not necessarily, again, because we went through 10 years of interest rates at 3%, and now we're at 7%. So the affordable prices today are dramatically lower than the affordable prices were in 2020. And so because that homeowner has to sell at the then current affordable price, there's very little chance for upside. The reason to do this is a 45-year covenant where that happens is to maintain the affordable unit in the inventory. Having said that, so that's the recommendation. The other way to do it, which is also commonly done, is to say, okay, so the original, let's just say it was $1 million house. No, let's not say that. Let's say it was a $900,000 house, and the affordable price is $500,000, right? So then, effectively, the developer subsidized $400,000, right? But the developer just had to eat that. That was the impact of the inclusionary requirement. That $400,000 becomes a loan payable to the city when that home is resold at an unrestricted market rate price. In addition to that, so in addition to that $400,000, let's just now say, well, I don't know what 4 of 9 was, but anyway, whatever that percentage is of the original $900,000 price, it's close to 50%, so say 40%, is if that house then sold for $1.5 million on a fair market value basis, there's a $600,000 gain. The city would also get 40% of that gain. Okay, so that would be $240,000. So it'd be the $400,000 plus the $240,000 would be repaid to the city for something they didn't spend money on, but they lost their affordable unit. You lost your affordable unit. So you would at that point have $640,000 to use for an affordable housing purpose. You couldn't replace that unit because that unit now cost $1.5 million and you only had $640,000. And the affordable price didn't go up that much. But what that does, and this is actually the way state density bonus works for ownership, is you've created wealth for a family. You're creating an opportunity to move up and out. You've created equity. And it's another viable goal. They're just different goals. So if you do the irrevocable covenant, you're creating a unit that you get to keep for a very long time. If you do the first sale scenario with the equity share, you've, in essence, created a delayed in lieu fee. And then you have one home buyer who then made a bunch of money.
And in the first scenario where it's a longer covenant, they likely won't, it's governed by whatever affordable prices are for those homes, and they may make a little bit very, very minimal. Is that?
Correct.
Yeah, it was an interesting discussion, because I think I caught the first part of it, which was you described the whole like equity sharing part of that. But it helped me understand a little bit about just the nature of making sure there are units available in the inventory, because you end up getting this loss of the unit once in that particular case. But that's not what's being recommended for our ordinance, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you for walking through that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Again. I will try just one more question, and so it's my 3, and then or if I'm counting, it might be 4, I don't know.
3A.
3, exactly. Can you describe for the 10-unit threshold that we have? It was stated, I think in the presentation, but also in the report, that was sort of the minimum number where you'll get a whole unit.
That's correct.
For that. Were there any other specific findings for why that was the particular recommendation for the threshold?
No.
Okay. The reason I ask is that it was also highlighted in the report that with a 5% threshold on detached single-family homes, you're going to get a half a unit
Right.
at 10, which means you're going to have to use an in lieu fee for those anyway. And secondly, our current ordinance has a threshold of 6.
Right.
So under the particular structure that we have, a 6-unit development would have a 0.6 unit requirement, and they would pay that in an in lieu fee. Is that right?
That's correct.
So operationally, by raising it to 10, we were basically taking all projects that are infill that we're going to be having as part of maybe smaller units, that maybe 6 to 9 units, and they would have no obligation under the recommended ordinance. Is that right?
That's correct. But the other thing to keep in mind is the suggestion is given that even that 0.6 requirement or that 0.5 requirement, if the in lieu fee is the full 50% of the affordability gap, it starts to be a burden on the, you're going to start getting into the financial hardship question, because that impact on the small project, and 10's a fairly arbitrary number, but the small number of units is any restriction on those starts to become a hardship. And so using a conservative approach, we started at 10.
Okay. But you said that there were also potential things of having a reduced requirement for
Sure.
those smaller ones.
No. That was absolutely part of the decision.
Okay. All right. I may have other questions later, but I will allow it to go to others.
Commissioner Link.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for the presentation. This is a follow-up question, so it doesn't count toward my 3. I mentioned that in some cases there would be a downside potentially if there was an affordable unit at lower interest rates that had a higher sale price, and then potentially at increased interest rates there would be a lower sale price. Does the seller then have to eat that downside?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. All right.
And I think that's always important to note, honestly, because everybody, especially through the 2010 to 2020, everything was great. But, eventually, and Ventura County tends to have a pretty good appreciation in area median income, so it's less likely than, say, Los Angeles County, which tends to be pretty stable. But when somebody buys an affordable house with an irrevocable covenant, they are absolutely taking that downside risk.
So all that glitters.
Pardon me?
All that glitters.
Yeah.
This is just, I'm just throwing this out there. So you've done this myriad number of times, obviously. In that time, have you seen developers reduce the size of the units that they construct as a result of an inclusionary housing ordinance?
The size of the project or the size of the units?
Size of the units or the size of the project
No.
in totality? No. So you haven't seen, as a result of something like this being enacted, then the average size of a unit go from 700 square feet to 500?
No,
The same
I haven't
number of
seen that
units.
at all. I think, because what developers will do, they'll build to what their market is. Pardon me? Oh, yeah, so they'll build to their market. And so then, I mean, what they'd like to ask you is to allow it to be smaller unit, to have the affordable units be smaller than the market rate units. And what we've typically recommended is if there's a mix of 3-bedroom units and a mix of 4-bedroom units, is to allow it to be in the smallest 3-bedroom unit and the smallest 4-bedroom unit, but still proportional.
And then this question is probably from Mr. Holt. In the event that we have a development that, especially in this climate where interest rates are outrageous, we're not seeing things that we've approved then be developed. If they come back for a time extension, does that then create this requirement?
I believe, I mean, that's at the discretion. I mean, time extensions are typically handled administratively. It's different when you have like a subdivision map, then you actually bring the subdivision map back. And I think in those cases, typically you can, if there are new fees or new rules, you can apply it at that point. But in terms of other entitlements, I don't know, I might defer to our attorney on that as
Yeah,
far as
I was
how
going to say, I think
handled.
we go to the entitlement aspect of it, and if it's an entitled project, then the extension is not changing the entitlement aspect of it. It's when it goes into some other type of major change to the project in which they have to bring a development permit back. That would be something in which maybe it's back on the table.
Understood. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Really? Guys are good. Okay. Oh, Commissioner?
I do have some. I just wanted to make sure that the commission had the ability to exhaust others, but if I may ask a few more?
Yes.
All right, thank you. One of the questions I did have is on language regarding phasing. There was, I think in the recommendation is that if the project is phased, the developer should pay or address the pro rata share of doing that. The language to me felt a little loose on the ability potentially for the developer. It says they may. Geez, I can't. Can someone help point me to where the phasing part might be?
It is part 7 of the draft
Timing of
ordinance in front of
construction.
you,
Yeah.
page 6, item C.
Yes, Part C. So inclusionary units shall be constructed and occupied concurrently with or prior to the construction and occupancy of market rate units. In phased developments, inclusionary units may be constructed and occupied in proportion to the number of dwelling units in each phase of the development. To me, I would want to try and squeeze that out and backload my inclusionary units in a later phase.
Except doesn't it say that they have to be developed all at once unless it's phased, and then if it's phased, they would be developed proportionately?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Okay, so the default is you provide all your units concurrently with construction of the project. Then if it's phased, so that's still the basic premise, was that you provide all the units. If it's phased, you're given the opportunity to produce the affordable units in proportion to each phase. There's no story in any of those where they could be anything other than either all at once or proportionate in each phase.
Are you describing the case studies you were providing?
No, just generally.
Okay.
I think.
Does the ordinance
You may wanna
language
contradict me.
prevent
No,
someone?
I don't want to contradict you. I just want to add a bit of clarification because the language should say may be constructed and occupied in proportion. It comes back to that point that there is a proportionate amount of affordability being built, commensurate with the market rate.
Yeah.
And to what degree do they deviate from that? I think that's, if it is a
I'm in
phased
100%
construction, that's something
agreement that I wanna
could be
support that.
conditioned as well on the project.
I just want to make sure, I'm in 100% agreement to do, they should front load it or do it at the same pace as the phasing. I just want to make sure, does the language ensure that that is in fact what will happen versus some creative interpretation? Phase 3 has a little bit more of the inclusionary units, they just don't happen to do phase 3.
But phase 3 would be proportionate, so say
Yeah,
there were.
but I mean, they just ran
Say
into
there were
financial
10
problems
units,
and
but
they
say
won't
there
do
were
phase
10
3.
units, in Phase 3. So there would have been 3 affordable and 7 market. If they don't build Phase 3, then there's no market, so they didn't have that 3-unit requirement.
Oh, I understand that, but Phase 3 is subject to the applicant's ability to actually construct Phase 3, so.
Absolutely. No, that's true. You're right about that, but
So-
I'm not sure how you get around that.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way to tighten the language to where they have that very clear and it's not interpretable, understanding the way that they can do that. I read that and I'm like, may is usually it does a lot of work sometimes.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding you, because this is actually language that came out of projects, this here, but also in other cities, that came out of projects that provided, say it was 100 units, provided all 10 in Phase 1, and then just financially couldn't do the rest of the project. That was never the intent, because they didn't build 100 units. So they got more inclusionary units than they were owed under the policy. And developers got really kind of ticked off about that.
Yeah, if it turns out that our legal department feels that there is no, that, they're either going to get front-loaded or proportional in the phasing, and the language supports that, that's fine. I'm bringing that up because
Sure.
I read it and I'm like, oh, okay. But I don't want it to be backloaded and not happen. That's the reason. So.
Understood.
So Chair, if I may, I am looking at it, and I think we're okay in the sense of, it does say pro rata, it does say for each phase development, so I think the may actually is, they can pay all at one time, or they may have it where they want to do it by the phasing, which would probably make sense for them. But I think as far as the requirement that they are going to do it for each section, or each phase, I should say, I think we're good.
I think the sticking point is with regard to the construction. So that would be Part 7, C. So it says, in phase developments, inclusionary units may be constructed and occupied in proportion to the number of dwelling units in each phase of the development. So rather than shall be constructed in proportion, it is may be constructed in proportion.
Right. I mean, I think they have the obligation to do it, period. So for each phase, they're going to have to meet the requirements or pay the in lieu fee to meet that requirement. So I think for each phase, I think we're going to be satisfied with, they're going to have to do what they have to do to meet the requirements. So I think the language is good. I think with when you read it as a whole and the totality of it, I think we have a solid ordinance as far as that issue is concerned.
If I may add, and the section above that regarding the location emphasizes that the inclusionary unit shall be equally distributed throughout the residential development and not clustered in any particular area. So you use that in combination with the timing. So if you're doing a phased project, it kind of reinforces that kind of equal distribution per phase, if, let's just say, all phases are created equal.
I think we are good on this point. Do you have any other questions?
I do. While we didn't go into detail here with respect to the financials, financial analysis for the non-residential linkage fees, I did catch the overview of what the expected rate of returns were and what were used as a sort of assuming no linkage fee, what would be 0, and what the impact of that would be, the incremental impact of that would be if we had a $5 per square foot indication there. And in that one, each of the standard 5 that we were looking at had a rate of return. It was upwards of between 5 or 7%. Only in the industrial was the threshold set to where that anticipated rate of return was higher than whatever the threshold was. Those thresholds were like 8 or 9%. And so if they don't reach 8 or 9%, we're going to say, well, it's not a fair rate of return. The incremental addition of a $5 fee was only 0.06 to 0.29% on the return. So if it was at 5%, it was 4.9% or 4.7%.
Right.
The fee, the application of the fee itself did not seem to be a significant impact on the anticipated rate of return. The reason why it was deemed to be red was that it didn't meet the threshold.
It didn't work in the first
There are
place.
whole sorts of other factors of why they're not going to
Yeah, it didn't work in the first place.
Right. So one thing I worry about here is that I understand council has made that direction. They've heard the same information. They provided the direction. But That's due to the economic factors at the time that we chose, that the study was conducted, correct?
Correct.
And this is a program that is going to have an effect on two things. One, changing economic environment, and two, we're about to update our general plan that has a whole slew of a different, land that may very well be attractive for people to develop in. And we're not going to charge anything based upon that discussion recommendation from council. Is that a fair interpretation of what I'm?
I think that's a fair interpretation, but what I'd also say in both the inclusionary and in the linkage fee analysis, they're a point-in-time analysis. As economic conditions change, you should always relook at these things. So if suddenly all commercial development became crazy, viable, then you could look at it again, and then you could just amend, because you didn't eliminate the linkage fee, you set it at 0.
Yep.
And so that's the same thing with the inclusionary. So what we always recommend is that you do an analysis within 5 years, but it doesn't mean you can't do one sooner or later than that when you see economics changing.
So if an application, let's say the ordinance is approved and it goes into effect and council keeps the policy at 0, and an application comes through and they are looking at it and when are they subject to the non-residential linkage fee? As long as it's prior to the application being complete? Or do they look at it and go, I'm non-residential, I'm going to pay 0, that's my option?
Correct. Because if the fee is set at 0, basically the program doesn't function. It's just still the bones of it are still there in the code, because, based on the council's direction, they didn't want to apply a fee at this point in time. That tool is still available if the economics change and in a few years or 5-year threshold, there's a study that goes out there and demonstrates that they can, then they can reenact that fee via resolution and set, the applicability date at that time.
Okay, would it just be when would it take effect for, again, this is all council discretion. I'm just trying to understand how it actually applies to things that come before us. When they change it, is it for all future applications that are applied, or those that still have not yet been complete at the time?
Well, it depends on, the nature of the resolution, but typically, if it is not complete, then, yeah, you would be subject, and the rule gets adopted, then you can apply it to the project.
Correct, when the application is deemed complete.
Yes, the application is deemed complete.
Okay. So at that time, it's like, there's a new requirement, you're not complete, you have to kind of, as with any regulation that.
Right, and I would say that in reality, trust me, in the discussions I've had with numerous developers and stuff, they are well aware of where the city council is moving as far as certain things, and I think they're going to have their eye on that. If council is going to be starting to make a move towards evaluating and making a decision on that, I certainly think that there's going to be something that's going to be public knowledge that they will,
Okay, thanks.
move on it.
One last question that I had on there. The definitions that we have here deal with residential developments and non-residential developments. And I had a question about a mixed-use development. Based upon what generally comes up, usually there's some commercial plus residential, and based on the definitions that I saw, it looked to me like a mixed use could be counted as either.
No, the residential would always count. The residential component of a mixed-use project counts if it's more than 10 residential units. It's subject.
And would the non-residential, assuming they change it from a non-zero fee?
It would then have an impact fee.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
It would have a linkage fee. If right now it's 0, but if the city council changed and said, say, retail now has a $5 fee, then the commercial square footage would have a $5 fee, and the residential units, the 10 or more, would have the inclusionary requirement.
And so it's clear in the ordinance that a mixed-use development, that they would know they're subject to both the residential and the non-residential components of this ordinance. I know it's 0, but assume it's not. Do they know that they're going to be subject to it, or are they in a position to kind of say, I think I'm a non-residential development because it's not solely due to construction of units.
That's outside my expertise.
Yep.
I have never seen that, I mean, mixed use has always been included in any ordinance I worked on, but that's not to say that, or it is to say perhaps you want to have a definition of mixed use.
And that's the reason I'm bringing it up.
No,
because-
yeah.
Yeah, because I did not see that was clearly called out. And we do have a plan in which we're looking to have a lot more mixed use.
Sure.
And I just want to make sure that there's clarity in the ordinance as to how it's intended to be
I think
applied.
Mr. Heher is looking
No,
at it right now.
it's a
No?
great question. I actually think that it's a residential development, and if it's not, it's a non-residential development, and therefore, both of them would apply, as Ms. Head just mentioned. To your point, though, I think we can look at that as far as if we want to entertain adding that. Again, when I looked at it, I thought, no, we have residential, we have non-residential, those are defined. I would say that I think we're good with the definition, but to your point about more clarity, I certainly think we can entertain, just looking at it again. You raise a great question to think about.
Try to raise quick questions.
No, I understand. I just, I actually think we're good in the ordinance as it is, because I think it's either one or the other, and you're getting a development
Okay.
permit for those things. However, we don't want to have to deal with a surprise when someone says, wait, I have to pay both, right?
Yeah. All right. That is, in fact, all of my questions.
Thank you, and the last one was a doozy. So, thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, and Mrs. Gore, we do not have any public comments?
I don't believe so. Let me check with Michelle really quick.
We have 2 speakers for this item.
We do.
Sorry.
Okay, at this time, can we ask the first speaker? I don't have any names in front of me, so can we ask the first speaker to state your name and city of residence?
Apologies, Chair, these speakers are for 8A.
Okay, thank you. Then we can move on. And staff, do you have any follow-up comments?
Not at this time, just the clarifications to the edits to the ordinance that's before you. I can repeat those if you like, and otherwise, that would be it.
Would we like that?
No, you got it.
No,
All
I think
right.
we all understood what's been talked
Yep.
about here. And as the city, as you are the applicant, do you have any rebuttal comments? Have to ask.
I don't feel the need to rebut to anything.
Okay. Another question?
Actually, procedure for us, Chair. We had commented with regard to one potential change to replace governing body with city council. I don't know if that's, Mr. Heer, is that acceptable? To the extent we,
So this is just a recommendation, so we would take that, just like the other questions we've had, you provided, and we really appreciate you provided some great input, and so we would take those comments and then say, okay, we're going to look at it a little bit more thoroughly as we get ready for city council, and if those changes are made, we would say, based on the recommendation of planning commission, we're suggesting or recommending such a change.
okay. And then second of all, Mr. Holt's change is already incorporated within the process.
For that one, it's very clear that we are going to, that was more of a we missed subdivision F needs to be deleted.
Okay, I just, for purposes, if a motion is
Perfect.
made,
Yep.
to know exactly how it's going to be.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Link, did you have something?
No, I just was wondering if that means Commissioner Lanson's going to be making a motion.
Well, at this point, I will close the public hearing and open up the floor for discussion and/or a motion. Commissioner Link, Commissioner Lanson.
I really thought Commissioner Lake was going to step up there, but okay. I am beyond thrilled that something we have talked about for so long is before us, and we get to actually kind of go through a process, and I cannot thank you, Mr. Holt, for all you've done, Ms. Head, for all putting it together, and the staff for a lot of hard work that went into making sure this process kind of came together. I looked at every application I do, but I always kind of have these 3 tenets of integrity, transparency, and balance in mind when looking at these kinds of things, and I think this does as good a job as I think it possibly was able to. looking at all the different components, figuring out the units would apply, what the in lieu fees would be. To Commissioner Ferris's comment about the linkage fee, I think I like it being set at 0 now. I think it sets a mindset, kind of like the same as our sales tax being the lowest in the county. It sounds great. Having no linkage fees creates an opportunity in the minds of potential owners. Whether or not it's a material or substantive issue, that's another thing, but I think it's a positive thing in terms of trying to appeal to businesses, especially biotech and other businesses that we want to come into the city. So again, it was a very detailed process. It was a lot of reading for all of us to do on a very short-term basis, but I loved what I was reading in terms of trying to create the opportunities, a thing, again, that was so important to our city, so important to the city council. And again, I am very happy to be able to make this motion again with the recommendation we said with regard to the one change, that we forward the recommendation to the city council to find that this municipal code amendment is exempt under the provisions of CEQA pursuant to section 15061B3, and to adopt the ordinance approving the amendments to Chapter 10 of Title 9 of the Thousand Oaks Municipal Code.
Thank you. Is there any discussion before we vote? Commissioner Ferris.
Thank you. I will ultimately be supporting the ordinance recommendation, but I do want to have some comments about it, which are not in our purview. They are to have those in the ether potentially listening. Could they lobby the council to do better, in my view? But I do want to offer as an amendment to the motion, which we may very well vote down, but I really believe that the threshold should still be 6. I think that there are a number of infill projects that are going to be the state of the city is one in which more and more development will occur in an infill relationship. And I think that there are a variety of smaller lots that will result in 6 to 9 units that I think are worthy of contributing to the inclusionary housing format. The way the ordinance is structured is that they would pay an in lieu fee. They would not be required to end up doing it. So I would like to move to amend the motion on the floor to have all references of the threshold that are specified as 10 units be 6 units.
Commissioner Lanson, before you answer whether you would accept that amendment, I'll just make a comment that I wouldn't vote for it that way.
I would look to our council.
Yep, so let me just put a check there, because I think one of the concerns we have is that we received, which is in their purview, city council's direction as to what they wanted. So I don't mind having recommendations to say certain things, but as far as the motion's concerned, I think we're getting to a point where we're going beyond what your obligations are as far as changes. Again, if you're saying it as a motion to say that it's going to be another part that we want to recommend as a comment to it, I think I think you're okay. But as far as changing the number from, unless Mr. Holt, unless you think that this is something that was in front of that they haven't made a final decision yet, but to me, I think that the numbers that were provided to us were based upon their recommendations, and it was certainly within their authority to do that. So that's where I'm kind of hesitating on a motion that now changes a direction that we already received from council on that point.
And I would like to make another comment, and that's all the study and all the work and all the analyzing that was done, and so much work went into this to put it at the 10 units. I just don't want to negate all that work by the experts. We're not experts.
If I can, Chair, and
Yes.
Mr. Here, again, is it something where, again, the motion's there, is it something where we can vote on this alleged amendment?
Correct.
Yes,
So it's-
no, and then go back
Right.
to the main motion?
So there's a request to amend the motion, and the initial vote would be, do you wish to amend the motion? And you would vote on that first, and then whatever that happens, then you would make the thing. I think my point is, I think the motion is concerned about the motion, but if you would do it that way, maybe it's simpler to do it that way, and then we can move on with the motion.
Okay, so will the secretary please prepare us for a vote on the motion, the amendment only.
Commissioner Ferris,
Yes.
Commissioner Tyler Kettlehut,
No.
Commissioner Lanson,
No.
Commissioner Link,
No.
Chair McMahon.
No.
Motion fails 4-1.
All right, so now we're back to the motion itself. And again, I'm not, to me, part of it is we're getting clarity from you or some comments from you about changes that we think for clarifying the ordinance and clarifying things, but there are some parts of this in which I think the council's already made a decision, given us the direction. This is bringing it to you for your consideration, but some of those elements are going to be something that is certainly in their purview, and I think trying to modify those is beyond the authority of the commission.
Thank you. Commissioner Ferris, did you have something else?
Yeah, so understood that the motion for the amendment has failed, but I disagree with the particular direction that is being provided by the city attorney. The reason is, the direction that has been provided by council is based upon the presentation that they had. It was after further study and seeing the actual text of the ordinance and its effect and thinking through its operations that we have an ability to provide a recommendation back to council. And I think it's completely within our purview to be able to make that recommendation to language of an ordinance for which we are asked to make a recommendation. So I don't think that this is outside the purview. It is certainly the discretion of the commission to say, no, we don't want to make that recommendation. But I disagree that it's not within our purview. There are other elements, such as the fees, that are absolutely not in our purview. And those are the discretion of the council. But the one thing the comments I do have about that are, I am concerned that if we have an ordinance that has a linkage fee, and the council chooses to set it to 0, it has the operational effect of not even being on the books. Because there's no requirement of anyone to follow that. And it's been on the books since 2008. It's been zeroed out since 2009. $0 have come from 14 years of this being on the books. We are effectively, I find it hard to believe that we're meeting a goal of updating our linkage fees by 2024 if we're keeping it exactly the same and at 0. So I think the ordinance is a great ordinance. It empowers us to be able to manage the inclusion, the inclusion of more inclusionary housing in our city as the city grows with the general plan update. I don't want this to be performative, however. And I think the ordinance definitely gives the city the opportunity to do that. I will vote for the motion and support that. My hope and some comments would be if there could be clarification on the application for mixed-use development specifically. That would be helpful. But other than that, I will support the motion.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Will the secretary please prepare us for a vote?
Commissioner Ferris,
Yes.
Commissioner Tyler Kettlehut,
Yes.
Commissioner Lanson,
Aye.
Commissioner Link,
Yes.
Chair McMahon.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
And I'll just state publicly that there is no appeal on a recommendation by the Planning Commission to the City Council. And therefore, we're done with that. Department reports 8A. Do we need to take a break or can we move on to 8A? Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. Thank you. Are we all good? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your patience with our break. We are back to our department report 8A. It's an overview of the General Plan 2045 Draft Environmental Impact Report. Presenting on behalf of staff is Interim Planning Manager Kristen Rice. Whenever you're ready.
Good evening, commissioners. Actually, we're going to have a different presenter tonight. We have a presentation for you that will provide an overview of the environmental review process for the general plan update and an overview of the draft environmental impact report that was released to the public last month. Rincon Consultants is part of our consultant team working on the general plan update, and they prepared the draft environmental impact report. Matt Maddox, who is a principal with Rincon Consultants, is actually attending via Zoom tonight and will be doing the presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt and I will run the presentation for him.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you, Kristen. Pleasure to be here this evening, and I apologize for not being there in person. Our staff member who was planning to attend became ill suddenly, so we're grateful for modern technology and be able to do this via Zoom. The purpose of tonight's presentation is, number one, as Kristen mentioned, to provide an overview of the draft general plan EIR, and also to inform the community on how to provide feedback during our public review process, which continues for another 2 weeks, which we'll get into some of the milestones and dates, and opportunities for additional public feedback as we go through the presentation. A couple things just to note: tonight is not about making any decisions or recommendations related to the draft general plan EIR. We will be coming back for hearings later in the fall, anticipated to be in November, before you as part of the Planning Commission, and then with your recommendation, if we proceed with a potential recommendation to certify the EIR and to adopt the general plan, we will then move on to the City Council, hopefully by the end of the year. So we'll get to those potential dates later. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background. This may be basic for some, but to ensure we're all on the same page, and for some of the community members who have not been part of the California Environmental Quality Act process before, CEQA, as it's known, applies to projects that require a discretionary approval from a state or local agency. In our particular case, because the general plan update requires the adoption and approval by City Council, CEQA does apply. And therefore, the city determined early on in the process that a program EIR, or environmental impact report, was necessary to evaluate the environmental impacts of the TO 2045 general plan update pursuant to CEQA. The intent of CEQA is, number one, to be a public disclosure of the potential environmental impacts that a project, in this case, the general plan update, may have on the environment. But it's also intended to get input from the public and from decision makers and from other partnering and participating agencies early on in the process. First and foremost, it's also intended to minimize, reduce, or avoid environmental impacts. And we analyze projects on a worst case scenario. And lastly, if there are potential impacts, we identify mitigation measures and develop and adopt a mitigation monitoring and reporting program to reduce those impacts over time. Next slide. So continuing on this process, where do we fall within the CEQA process? This slide just kind of demonstrates the entire arc of the CEQA process from the beginning all the way to the end, and we want to just highlight kind of where we are. First and foremost, the process began back last June in 2022 when the city circulated a notice of preparation. At that point in time, we held a public scoping meeting during a 30-day public review where we sought input from both concerned agencies, public agencies, but also from the public on any potential environmental impacts associated with the general plan. Once we were able to get some comments and get further along in the general plan update process, actually have draft elements and draft policies and a draft of growth that we could anticipate from the general plan, we're then able to draft the EIR sections, which is highlighted in the red. At that point in time, we then published the draft EIR, put it out for what's called a notice of availability, beginning a 45-day public review. That is where we are right now in the process. We're in day 30 of the 45-day public review. We have 2 weeks remaining in that process, and we wanted to come before you and for the public today to disclose some of those impacts as a first step, but then also to seek additional questions or any comments from the public and from you as the commission tonight. Once that process ends, that 45-day public review is completed on the 25th of September, the city will then prepare a final EIR, which will include a response to any comments received and any updates or edits to the EIR analysis. We will then publish the final EIR and come back to the Planning Commission for hearings. And then if, with your recommendation at that stage, move on to the City Council for a twofold motion and decision, and first needing to certify the environmental impact report, and second, making a decision on whether to adopt the general plan. Next slide. The issues or analysis that we included as part of the environmental review included all the issues listed here, and I'm not going to read all of them off, but what I do want to highlight is these are all of the issues that are recommended based on the CEQA guidelines that are produced by the state, including some issues that may have no impact, including mineral resources, and a couple others that have less than significant impacts or really no major concern as part of the analysis. We do include all of them as part of the EIR. And next slide, please. We'll get into some of those in the next few. In terms of structure of the EIR, we first start with an introduction and summary. Next slide, Kristen. Appear to be frozen on the screen, at least that I'm looking at.
We're able to hear you if you want to continue.
Oh, sure. I just, Kristen, can you advance to the next slide, the EIR structure slide, please?
We are looking at the EIR structure slide
Okay.
now.
It must be, sorry, it must be frozen on the TV output that I'm seeing. Okay, I'll continue. Sorry about that. In terms of the EIR structure, the EIR begins with an introduction, providing background setting, introduction, the legal background of the setup of the environmental impact report, as well as a detailed project description that lays out, number one, the changes that are anticipated as a result of the general plan. That's twofold. That's both the elements and the policy changes associated with the general plan update, but also the anticipated growth that we look at and where the areas of potential development may occur as a result of the general plan update. Then when we get into each of the EIR impact sections, we actually have a three-tiered setup in each of those areas, including setting the grounds of what the current environmental setting is, the potential impacts when implementation of the general plan occurs out through the year 2045, which is our planning horizon year. And then if there are any identified impacts, what mitigation measures are necessary to reduce or to avoid those impacts. We also include a section on alternatives to the proposed project and also analyze other impacts, including growth-inducing impacts and energy. One thing just to note is that this EIR is a program EIR. What that means is that rather than looking at a single project or a specific development project at a specific site, we're looking at a series of connected actions that will govern future activities and decisions over time. Next slide. In terms of the timeline and where we are in the process, as noted earlier, we began the CEQA process last year in June 2022, when the notice of preparation was issued, and held a scoping meeting at that point midway through that 30-day public review period. In August 11th, we released the draft EIR for public review, and that 45-day public review period closes on September 25th. And at the end of October and early November, we will have the final EIR concluded after we provide a response to comments and the mitigation monitoring reporting program, as well as findings and a statement of overriding consideration. At that point in time, we'll be preparing for public hearings coming back to you before the Planning Commission and then the City Council to follow. In terms of the next slide, please. In terms of the draft EIR, a little bit of summary, and this is, bear with me, this is pretty high level for a roughly 500+ page document. And we wanted to just kind of share the rough findings of the impacts and some of the key ones. The five environmental topics were found to have a less than significant impact that did not require any mitigation. Those included aesthetics, the land use and planning section, population and housing, public services and recreation, and wildfire. There were 6 environmental topics that were found to have no impacts, meaning no mitigations necessary as well. That was agriculture and forestry resources, energy, geology and soils, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, and mineral resources. Next slide. We did have 17 mitigation measures in the document for various impacts, both for those that were potentially significant with mitigation, but then would reduce impacts to less significant level, or there were some where mitigation was required, and even with mitigation, the impact was not reduced. And I'll share that on the next slide. So mitigation measures included the following, were included for the following topics, including air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, greenhouse gas emissions, noise, paleontological resources, transportation, and utilities. And one thing to note is that for a program EIR such as this and for a general plan update, mitigation is a little bit different than a project where you might have conditions of approval on a project to do something during construction or that applies operationally for that project. The mitigation measures included in this draft EIR are combinations. In some cases, there are those instances where there's mitigation that would apply for future projects that would be implemented under the general plan that would have construction-related impacts and therefore would require construction mitigation measures. But for some, it was actually policy changes or policy updates to the actual general plan itself, such that the general plan in and of itself is self-mitigating. Next slide. We did have 5 significant unavoidable impacts, including air quality, and that as a result of cumulative development associated with the general plan update, both from a construction and operational standpoint. There are emissions, and without the ability to predict each and every project that may come over the next 22 years through the horizon year, we leaned on the side of being conservative and applied a significant unavoidable impact for that. Cultural resources, because the project could potentially cause issues to historic resources, even yet to be identified historic resources. That is a very sensitive topic on CEQA grounds, and therefore that was determined to be significant, unavoidable. Greenhouse gas emissions is an interesting one as the city is going through its CF update process. But because that process is separated from the general plan update and not included as part of this draft EIR and under its own separate process coming later, at this point in time, we can't say with certainty that the city and the general plan update would necessarily meet state requirements for greenhouse gas reductions through the year 2030 or 2045. I will say we've left some notations in there that if and when the CF is updated and identifies a pathway to achieve that, and if adopted and identifies those, that theoretically that impact would be reduced. But because that's not happening as part of this process, we'll need to wait and have that concluded later. So we've identified it conservatively as significant and unavoidable. From a noise standpoint, both construction and at a couple intersections, traffic noise was a concern and exceeded city standards that we identified. And even with mitigation, we can't say with certainty that the noise would be reduced to a less significant level. And lastly, transportation, similar to greenhouse gases, with the state moving away from level of service as a CEQA impact and to vehicle miles traveled, we identified, and the city not yet selecting a vehicle mile travels metric, we utilized the recommendation from the state, which is a 15% below existing baseline as a threshold, which is, I will say candidly, quite hard to achieve. While the overall general plan actually would reduce VMT, it doesn't achieve a 15% reduction. So we've identified that as a potentially significant impact as well. Next slide. We also, as I mentioned before, are required to analyze EIR alternatives as part of the process. We looked at 3 alternatives, including the required no project alternative as alternative 1, which is basically identifying what the continuation of existing conditions. In this case, the continuation of the existing general plan and the proposed general plan update would not be adopted. Alternative 2, because we had a VMT impact, we actually looked at as a transportation enhancement of looking at some more stringent policies and a development framework that would reduce VMT and associated impacts associated with that transportation, including impacts to air quality, noise, and greenhouse gas that we also identified. And lastly, we looked at an enhanced construction regulation. Because the majority of the impacts that we looked at in the IR were construction related, we looked at policies that would reduce overall impacts of construction with stricter regulations prior to project approval and during construction. Next slide. And lastly, we also included a section on alternatives considered and ultimately rejected. While we take comments from the public and from and as part of the process on various land use alternatives to look at. One that was rejected was a reduced build-out alternative. It was rejected ultimately, not because it wasn't a great idea, but because the reduced build-out scenario would limit the city's ability to meet RENA and state requirements into the future. And therefore, we determined it just was not feasible from that standpoint. Next slide. Next step. So this week, this Thursday on September 14th, we'll be hosting a virtual open house where members of the public and concerned agencies can come bring comments, questions, or concerns related to the draft EIR. We're really trying to have that as an outreach event to really ensure people's voices are heard and concerns, or if there are any input or guidance related to the EIR analysis, it's included as part of the record. And we'll take those and consider them as part of the final EIR as well. Our public comment period ends on two comment periods are ending. The draft general plan itself has been out for public review since June 2nd. That will conclude this Friday, September 15th, on comments related to the general plan. And then on Monday, September 25th, will be the close of the comment period on the EIR itself. Following that close on the 25th, we will prepare responses to comments that will be published as part of the final EIR, and any comments received that may alter the analysis, we will update the EIR analysis accordingly and provide that as part of the final EIR package. We will then prepare findings of fact and statement of overriding considerations given the significant unavoidable impacts that we've identified. And then at that point in hopefully late October, early November, package that, put that back out for, post that back on the city's website, to2045.org, and bring that to the Planning Commission, and with your approval, then proceed to City Council hearings later in December. Next slide. And with that, I'd like to just open the floor to answer any questions about the EIR. I have my colleague Jesse Borenberg with me as well, who's our project manager on the EIR. We're happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the EIR or take any comments or input as suggested. Thank you for your time.
Commissioner Link?
Mr. Maddox, thank you for your presentation. Just one comment with regard to the transportation impact. As I'm sure you're aware, with SB 743, OPR does not require that council adopt a threshold for VMT, but the city has in the past used a threshold of a 0 increase in VMT for the projects that have come before us that have either required a MND or some kind of environmental document. So I'm not sure whether that's the threshold we should be using, but so far as I know, it's not the 15% below.
Correct, and we actually include that as a discussion as part of the methodology in the document itself. And I will want to clarify that threshold that has been used lately in the city can continue to be used. This EIR does not override the city's ability to select a project threshold on a project-by-project basis. But from a guidance, and because we look at this as a programmatic and looking to the future, the 15% recommendation, while not set in stone and is a recommendation by the state, we determined that would be the more conservative route to do for this process. And we have some guidance in there in discussion that the city will be having a VMT impact study done following the adoption of the general plan, if in fact it gets adopted. And that VMT analysis will actually help determine what the new city threshold would be, whether that continues to be 0 or if it's somewhere in between, say, a 7 or 8%. That would be a document that has some legal analysis behind it, as well as has the nexus study to make that determination that the city can be confident that they are following CEQA guidelines to the T moving forward.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Commissioner Ferris?
Thank you. Again, thank you very much for the presentation on the environmental document. I just wanted to, I think, clarify, given the alternative that was entertained but rejected. I think I might have made the recommendation. If you look at the letters, I had provided a notice of preparation to request a reduced scope alternative for this, not necessarily build out. I think that the comments in the EIR appropriately making that assumption of if you just lower density across there, we might not meet our RENA things, is probably an appropriate view. Taking the reduced build-out alternative, I think I was more focused on, could you just pick a section of them as the scope with respect to the general plan update? That said, the analysis provides analysis for 4 different alternatives, the main 1+ alternative. So I just wanted to clarify that. I did have a question about the land use diagram, which was in there. There are some portions, if you compare the current general plan land use element to that proposed and identified in the EIR, that they actually lie within the city's labeled current planning area, yet outside the city limits and sphere of influence. And they're not on the exhibit that is analyzed and part of the general plan update. And I wanted to just understand because they have specific land use designations on them. The city has actually made them in some cases, their parks, golf course, and open space, which is voter protected by Measure W. Others are residential. I just wanted to get an understanding of what the impact of that would be if we're not including that on our land use element, even though they currently are. What would happen with those designations that the city has already made decisions about in the past?
Commissioner Ferris, if I may. In regards to the planning areas, specifically as the current general plan has planning area that is beyond the sphere of influence. The sphere of influence is essentially the area that we have land use authority over. Those areas that are included beyond our sphere of influence are essentially policies that we have elected to use. However, they don't have, in terms of our ability to control land uses beyond our sphere of influence, they carry very little weight. That being said, those land uses, for the most part, truth be told, that being said, I would say that it does not impact, the analysis that's before you, but at the same time, even though that they're land use designations, they're not in anything that we would have authority over. If a project were to occur on any of those areas, it would fall solely within the county's jurisdiction. We could comment as a practical matter, like, hey, we have a policy about this land use designation, but it's beyond our sphere of influence. We don't actually have a say, per se, on what goes on there. That being said, if something were to happen on the county side that's contrary to a land use designation, they would actually have to amend their general plan. Like, let's say we had it designate open space beyond our sphere of influence, and they decide to turn it into residential, rural, or what have you. Then they would have to notify us, and we could comment on it at that point in time. But for the purposes of the general plan and the actual application of land use designations, having the planning area coincide with the sphere of influence is the most part, the most practical way of doing it.
Okay. And I understand that, aligning what we call the planning area to the sphere of influence makes sense. It's just there has been decades of city planning in the city of Thousand Oaks that have looked beyond that. And even, I'm just trying to think ahead. Many of us might not be here for future decisions to where the land use owning of land is different. The county comes in and says, we'd really like to make that residential, and we've designated it open space, so we may want to engage in annexation and LAFCO to try and bring that into our sphere of influence. The city has already designated these areas with particular land use designations. Question is, what does that do if the city wants to take action to expand in those regions? And what effect does that have if those land use designations aren't on our land use element anymore?
Well, I would just say, the draft general plan and what we've heard so far, the close of the public comment period is in a couple of days on the general plan, and it will be presented, but at this point in time, there hasn't been any direction to pursue what areas can we expand the sphere of influence at this point in time. That would have to be something, considered by the council and then directed to staff. So at this point in time, the general plan as drafted basically assumes that the sphere of influence is our defining area for the planning purposes.
I'm not mentioning that there are any things on the horizon. I'm just trying to think, this is a planning exercise, right? To kind of look into the future in that. So I'm happy about the water demand growth percentages as they relate to other projected growth percentages, such as residential units, population, wastewater demand. To me, it seemed like the water demand was not increasing at pace as the other ones, and I just wanted to have an understanding, is there a different set of assumptions or something else that's there in the analysis?
Yeah, at this point, we would like to defer to Matt at Rincon, if you can, kind of address that question for us, please.
And I'm actually going to pass it to my colleague, Jesse Borenberg, who has some details on that can share with the Commissioner.
Yep. Hi, everyone. So yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Commissioner. First of all, just some context on the projections themselves. The projections for the water supply and demand listed at the beginning of that section are taken from the respective urban water management plans prepared by each of those water suppliers. And those plans are updated every 5 years and are based on population projections from state, regional, and local agencies. And those projections will be updated in future urban water management plans.
Okay, you have frozen. Did we lose him completely?
Maybe I'll continue that thought. So as you were saying, the urban water management plans get updated every 5 years. So what we were using as the basis is the latest ones for each of those and the population projections out to the future for supply and demand. What we anticipate, and that being said, we don't assume that those will be updated and be able to cover the future supply and demand necessarily. But we anticipate that once updated, if the general plan is adopted as proposed with anticipated growth that's projected in the EIR and in the general plan update, that those plans would be updated accordingly. So the growth rates that are used within those individual plans don't necessarily align with the current projection that we have as part of the general plan update, because they are from the existing general plan or from SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments data, the population projections out to the future.
Just as a follow-up then, are we concerned at all that this is not an accurate reflection of water demand based upon the general plan update?
Well, what we do as part of the analysis is do the expected growth anticipated to see if the future supply would accommodate the future expected demand plus the anticipated demand that we are adding to that. So that's what the utility section of the EIR analyzes. It looks like we have Jesse back.
I'm sorry, my computer died unexpectedly. I'm assuming, Matt, did you cover that question?
I did. I think what I didn't get to, Jesse, I kind of just focused on the water. If you can share some of the wastewater items.
Yeah. So the methodology for the wastewater estimates is also quite different based on best available information. So the methodology for the wastewater generation is based on a much broader, more nationally applicable standard, with using US EPA estimates as opposed to the water supply and demand estimates, which are more localized with the urban water management plans. So have a more local versus national methodology for those estimates.
And to answer your question, Commissioner Ferris, about the reliability of that data, this is the conservative approach that we typically use throughout the state regarding general plans. We want to be as conservative as possible, and as mentioned early in the presentation, we want to analyze the worst case scenario. So often our analysis usually overestimates the potential future demand, and we do that intentionally so that we aren't underestimating and all of a sudden get 20 years down the road and don't have the supply that we anticipate. So this is intended to help set the stage on what anticipated demand may be if every parcel is developed with under the growth assumption that we've included. And if so, we want to ensure that we have adequate water, wastewater, and other utilities as part of that.
Okay. Thank you. Just to, not to belabor it, because I think that there's going to be public hearings down the road in here. This is just to kind of bring it to attention. But for the commission's benefit to know where I'm coming from, provided some statistics to staff, and that's where some of this comes from. To me, it looked as in, given sections 2.5, the growth projection for housing units were about 16% during the period. Economic growth in jobs is about 16%. The wastewater demand would increase by about 16%, but the listed future water demand was at about 4.5%. So that's the rationale for my question, and if the staff and consultants can go back and have an understanding of why those don't necessarily align or what the different assumptions might be, that would be helpful. If I may, Chair, one last question.
Let's keep it to one last question, if you don't mind.
It is one last question. So there were a variety of sections in which there were different comments. Some of the things were brought up and stated that they were addressed in the EIR. Others were saying it's not the purview of the EIR to analyze, for example, economic impact or the process of approving the general plan. I just wanted to, because the public might hear this, how best would it be for the public or others that have commented to be able to get an understanding of how they can have their comments reflected for the decision-making as they occur during the fall?
Sure, absolutely, Commissioner Ferris. And to the public that is watching, the best way would be to submit your comments online at toaks2045.org. Go ahead and submit a form and put your comments there. You could do general comments or you could do it by chapter. And then at the close of the public comment period for the general plan, as we stated before, we're going to be putting all the comments into a matrix and presenting those back to Planning Commission and City Council so that all of them can be reviewed and potentially incorporated.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Any more discussion? Okay, so if there's any more, no more discussion, we need a motion to accept the presentation. We're not approving it or disapproving it, we're just accepting it. And
I apologize, Chair. I just want to make sure that we don't have any public comments on this matter.
oh
even
my
though it's
goodness, you're right, we have public comments, thank
Okay.
you. I don't know what I'd do without Mr. Year. Okay, so we do have two public comments, and I apologize for almost missing you. The first comment, who is by phone call, is Karen Wilburn. State your name and city of residence for the community.
Good evening. I'm Karen Wilburn from Newberry Park. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm from Newberry Park, and I'd like to discuss two issues on the draft DIR. Several exhibits in the report presented current average daily trips known as ADTs versus 2045 general plan build-out ADTs for various sections of roads throughout the city. In Newberry Park, the greatest impact will come from the Borchard lot, which could theoretically include commercial sites and up to 1,000 housing units. Main roads, Borchard and Wendy, will certainly be impacted. The consultant allocated an additional 5,000 ADTs on Borchard from the 101 to Wendy. On the other hand, they only allocated 20 additional ADTs on Wendy between the 101 and Borchard. This makes no sense to me. When asked, the general plan team replied that A, this is not a project-specific EIR and doesn't address the impact of individual projects, and B, these ADTs are being used in reference to noise and air quality, not traffic. So I know traffic's going to be studied more closely when an individual project is reviewed, but I have to ask, what's the point of the CIR if it's not taking into consideration potential impacts of these land use changes? I also understand that traffic is now measured by vehicle miles traveled, but the average person's going to look at these figures as a traffic predictor, and clearly the consultant made an error here which should be addressed. The second item concerns a 2019 study which reviewed how population versus evacuation routes contributed to the death toll in the 2018 Paradise Fire. Paradise was found to be in the worst 1% of population evacuation routes in the state's high fire zones. In that analysis, they identified 20 other zip codes also in the worst 1%, many having 3 to 5 times higher rate of population to evacuation routes than Paradise had. One of those zip codes is 91320 from Newbury Park to Dos Vientos. Comments about wildfire impact on page 45 of the draft DIR include things such as TO 2045 includes policies to address emergency access. TO 2045 would not substantially impair an adopted emergency evacuation plan. Impact would be insignificant and no mitigation is necessary. Again, I understand this is not a project-specific EIR, but respectfully, the city and consultant are whitewashing this issue. The land use change could potentially add several thousand additional residents in an evacuation area which is already in the worst 1% of the state. And we experienced this firsthand during the Woolsey fire. This most certainly needs to be addressed as part of the general plan update. Thank you.
Thank you. And based on what Ms. Rice has said, I would recommend that you put that online and fill out the form that she has spoken about so that it gets added to what is presented to us again and to the city council. And then the next speaker is Pedro Toscano. Please state your name and city of residence for the record.
Hi, good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your time. My name is Pedro Toscano. I live in Fillmore. I'm a business agent for the Southwest Mountain States Regional Council of Carpenters. I work and recreate in the vicinity of the project of the general plan. I believe that I will be impacted by the environmental impacts of this project, the master plan 2045. I would like to ask the commissioners to incorporate language into the proposed general plan 2045 requiring that residential, commercial, and mixed-use developments be built with contractors that will hire locally, pay prevailing wage, and utilize apprentices from the state certified apprenticeship training program. Workforce requirements reduce construction-related environmental impacts while benefiting the local economy and workforce development. And the most recent study in 2020 report titled Putting California on the High Road, a Job and Climate Actions Plan for 2030, the California Workforce Development Board concluded that investing in growing, diversifying, and upskilling California's workforce can positively affect return on climate mitigation efforts. The South Coast Air Quality Management District recently found that the local higher requirement can result in air pollutant reductions. And I hope that you consider recently the state of California reiterated its commitment towards encouraging workforce development and house affordability through Affordable Housing and High Roads Job Act of 2022, otherwise known as Assembly Bill 2011. Which requires projects pay workers and prevailing wage and hire from state certified apprenticeship programs for projects meeting certain city affordability and development standards. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners, for your time.
Thank you. And we have no other public comments? Okay, thank you. At this time, if there's no further discussion, I'm looking for a motion. Commissioner Link?
I will move that we receive and file the general plan draft EIR report and that this does not constitute a project under CEQA.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right. Madam Secretary, can you give us a vote?
Commissioner Ferris?
Yes.
Commissioner Tyler Kettlehut?
Yes.
Commissioner Lanson?
Aye.
Commissioner Link?
Yes.
Chair McMahon?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. And thank you to the consultants who stayed up a long time online to wait and present. I appreciate that. Item 9, Commission comments and AB 1234 reports. Commissioner Ferris?
Not to discuss at all, I'm just going to ask the city attorney, what is the best route for the commission or the council to address or discuss the topics that were brought up by Mr. Maple regarding the 100-year plaque?
I can certainly say that we are aware of Mr. Maple's comments and requests. I was surprised to see him here just because Planning Commission is not the board. It is City Council, as you are well aware. So I can tell you certainly that staff is aware of the request, and I don't know if there's been an official response to him. The other issue I just want to bring up is that this property is now private property. There are conditions for maintaining this complex as a historical building, as you all are well aware. It's in the development agreement, but it's also just we've had numerous discussions with the two teams proposing to build on this site, and they are certainly well aware of the need to maintain and refurbish the historical site. So if there is some type of plaque that would be put on there, that would be something that would be probably negotiated with them as well, just because it's their private property at this point.
Yeah, that's definitely of note. And just for historical understanding, Mr. Maple has been a vanguard of the history of the buildings and within the community. He has served to bring things to the city's attention, and I always welcome when he comes forward to bring those to the attention. So,
Thank you. Are there any other commission comments? Commissioner?
I just had one comment, and I apologize if this is not the time and place, or perhaps even my place. But one of the things that I've been noticing, especially on windy days, is that our new solid waste purveyor has a tendency to leave trash that is fallen out of the receptacles on city streets. And I don't know if anybody else has observed this, but it happens quite frequently in my neighborhood. So if we could pass something along to city staff, to Ms. Cox, potentially to maybe encourage them to get out of the truck if things fall off into the street. Residents put it in the can. We do that diligently. Perhaps it should make it into the truck.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Item number 10, Ms. Zelaya, are there any follow-up items, announcements, or upcoming issues?
Yes, thank you. On September 12th, tomorrow evening, City Council will have a public hearing on the CBDG Consolidated Action Plan, which is a community development block grant, and department report on Senior Mobile Home Park Urgency Ordinance. On September 26th, there will also be a department report requesting an initiation of various municipal code amendments to update various sections of the code. And I'll move into 10B, which is upcoming Planning Commission schedule items. On September 25th, there will be a public hearing on a 3-story, 24-apartment complex at 1730 Los Feliz Drive. And right now, there are currently no items scheduled for October 9th. However, on October 23rd, there will be items, there will be 2 public hearings, one for a 5-story hotel and retail building at 225 North Moore Park Road, and one for a navigation center with up to 50 units, support facilities, and also support services at 1205 Lawrence Drive.
Thank you. Anything else? Thank you all. We will now adjourn to the next meeting, September 25th, 2023, at 6 p.m.